I started my spiritual journey when I was in high school. I was 15 years old, and I've briefly talked about this in some of my other videos, and I will link them somewhere around here if you are interested in hearing all about that and how exactly that happened for me. But when I first began my spiritual journey, and I think this applies to many of us, that we want to immerse ourselves in as much knowledge and as much literature and as much opinion and other people's experiences as we can, so we can better understand what we ourselves are experiencing. I think the beginning stages of a spiritual journey is when we are absorbing the most in terms of searching for information, trying to understand things, and we're really consuming other people's, like I said, their personal experiences and their opinions and their content, so we can get better footing and better understanding of what we ourselves are experiencing, and I was no different. So when I first began my journey, I started reading a lot of books that were centered around spirituality or mindfulness, and in this video, I'm going to share 4 books with you that I feel like really positively impacted my spiritual journey, and I think a lot of the beliefs and core values that I learned from these books are still present within me today, and I think you can see the evidence of that in some of my other videos, as I stated, and I will go ahead and get into it. The first book that I feel like had a significant impact on me was Buddhism, Plain and Simple: The Practice of Being Aware Right Now Every Day by Steve Hagen. So I read this book when I believe I was 16 years old, so it was my junior year of high school. And I picked up this book because I was starting to take my meditation practice seriously, and because I wanted to really focus on meditation, I wanted to better understand the religion or the people that have kind of come to this great understanding of meditation, and that is the religion of Buddhism. But having been exposed to Buddhism in other ways online, like through videos or through social media posts that I had seen, I still felt like I didn't have a very clear understanding of what exactly Buddhism was or what exactly the core principles were. And so this book, having advertised itself as being plain and simple, was something that I felt like I needed, and I was drawn to it because of how it advertised itself. So the author, Steve Hagen, is a Zen priest who studied Buddhism for 30 years, and 15 of those years were spent underneath Zen master Dainin Katagiri. I believe that's how you say his name, who was also a former Zen master. And it was from that Zen master that Steve received his Dharma transmission, which is essentially your endorsement or your permission to teach. And from there, he has been teaching, I believe, in a facility in Minneapolis, or at least at the time of this book being published, that's where he was teaching. So as I said, what drew me into this book was that it advertised itself as being plain and simple, and having read it, and from my memory, I do believe that that holds to be true. And Steve has a way of practically explaining the core principles of Buddhism and explaining mindfulness and meditation in a way that is very easy to understand, easy to comprehend. And it almost feels like a conversation rather than, someone explaining Buddhism to you or explaining mindfulness to you. It almost feels like you're having this personal conversation with him as you are reading the book. And he's able to draw real life experiences that are relatable to most people in with Buddhism. So you are able to make that personal connection within your own mind and within your own reality of what exactly those principles are and how you can apply them to your daily life. So I think this book is a perfect read for those that are interested in Buddhism, for people who are interested in bringing more mindfulness and awareness into their daily life and creating a daily practice around mindfulness, and who are interested in the practice of meditation. So I'll read you 2 quotes, or a couple of quotes, from the book that I felt like were memorable enough to be mentioned in this video. "You are the final authority. Not me, not the Buddha, not the Bible, not the government, not the president, not mom or dad, you. No community of philosophers, scientists, priests, academicians, politicians, or generals, no school, legislator, parliament, or court can bear responsibility for your life or your words or your actions. That authority is yours and yours alone. You can neither get rid of it nor escape from it. Of course, you can pretend to give up this ultimate authority or ignore it and act as if you haven't got it or try to give it to someone else. But you haven't really gotten rid of it. You gave your authority to someone else. You chose to deny or ignore that authority. You made the decision to lie to yourself, to pretend that you lack this authority. And I feel like this quote is something, as I said, if you watch my other videos, I think some of the principles that I'm going to talk about that I received from these books are still evident in the way that I speak about spirituality and my personal journey now. And I believe that this is one of them. I am definitely a believer that we have full authority over how we choose to respond to things, how we choose to go about our lives. And I know that there would be people that would disagree with that we have no control over what happens in our external world. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But I think the main point of bringing more awareness and mindfulness into our lives is to come to a better understanding of what's happening in our internal space so that our internal space can create a better external space, meaning that you are aware of your feelings, you're aware of your emotions, you're aware of your responses, you're aware of your decisions and how they could potentially impact your external space. So just bringing awareness to the self will enable you to create a better external reality, because you realize the control that you have over your connections, over your decisions, etc. So I felt like that quote has stuck with me. And then also one that is on page 107, which I feel like accurately describes what I was saying in my How to Begin a Meditation Practice video. Give yourself permission to have thoughts. When you're disturbed by your thinking, it tends to augment itself and go faster and louder. The more you try to control it, the more it will gain in strength. Give your mind a lot of space and it quiets down. Try to control, quiet, or constrict it and it goes wild. We only need to notice what's happening and ease off. Let the thinking stop by itself. It will if you leave it alone. And I feel like, as I said, I was expressing that in my How to Begin a Meditation Practice video, that many people believe that meditation is the clearing of the mind, but rather than it being that, it is bringing awareness to the mind, to the thoughts, to the emotions happening within, and not trying to control or wrangle in or change those thoughts or to judge those thoughts, but to just allow those emotions and those thoughts to take place without trying to do anything to them or to, as he said, augment them. And when you allow your thoughts and your feelings to just be as they are, it allows them to leave in a way that is more organic and more natural to the natural flow of our emotional state. So I recommend this book. The second book that I feel had the most impact on me is Your Sacred Self, Making the Decision to Be Free by Wayne Dyer. So again, I read this book when I was 16. I think 16 was the age where I was just tearing through spiritual books because, like I said, I was experiencing a lot and I was going through my remembrance process. So I was just really trying to understand what exactly was happening. And this is one of the books that I picked up. I think I actually found this at a thrift store or at a secondhand bookshop, and I'm very glad that I found it. Wayne Dyer was a psychotherapist and a best-selling author of many self-help and inspirational books, and he was also someone that frequently did motivational speeches on radio and television. And I feel like his work has just reached so many people and has adequately bridged the gap between psychology and spirituality. I think that the combination of the two is what makes his work so understandable and so relatable and so easy to digest, rather it being filled with a bunch of spiritual or scientific jargon that no one can really understand if they don't have some sort of background in psychology or if they're not the most guru type of spiritual person. But as I said, the way that he communicates all of the information is very practical. And again, it's one of those books that feels like a conversation rather than someone teaching at you or someone trying to get you to do some regimented 10-step program of how to become spiritually enlightened. It's something very casual, but also I think it's that casualness that makes it so powerful. The book focuses on tapping into the higher self, living each day with mindfulness, and understanding the mental obstacles that may prevent us from reaching our greatest potential or our highest potential. All throughout the book, he provides these, as I said, these practical steps that anybody can start implementing in their own life to bring more awareness into their everyday actions and their everyday decisions. So like, for example, on page 62, there are suggestions for releasing realism and welcoming idealism. On page 206, he discusses typical peace avoidance behaviors like confronting and arguing, competing and comparing, how to give yourself the gift of silence every single day. So as I said, there are a lot of practical steps in here and practical ways that one can bring more mindfulness into their everyday life. So funnily enough, as I said, when I was 16 and after I had read this book, there was a period of my life when I was going through a very transitional phase when I was 18 years old. And this book and Wayne Dyer himself kind of came back into my awareness. And so I started listening to a lot of his tapes from like, you know, the 80s and the 90s and like the early 2000s. And I would just listen to these tapes on YouTube when I was going to sleep, when I was getting ready in the morning, when I was cooking, when I was cleaning, when I was just doing anything that was kind of like going through the motions of doing said thing. I would be listening to his tapes, and it brought me to this understanding of the phrase that is well known by being said by Jesus within the Bible, which is the I am that I am quote. And for so long, that had been something that had been in my cerebral, even when I was a child being raised in a Christian household. That was something that always stuck with me because I felt like I couldn't really understand what he was trying to say. But in that transitional moment that I was having, you know, in my life in general, and then listening to Wayne Dyer's tapes, and he even addressed that quote at one point, it brought me to this deeper level of understanding, and I finally knew what that quote meant, in that it didn't just apply to the ascended masters like Jesus and Buddha, and it applied to us, you know what I mean? Because we are all reflections of God consciousness. We are essentially God consciousness having a human experience. And so it inspired me enough that I actually got the quote, you can barely see it, but I actually got the quote tattooed, and that's, you know, where that comes from. So now you know a little bit about me and that particular tattoo. But I recommend this book for people who are looking to connect with their own divinity and their own spirituality. For those who are looking to connect with the God consciousness that exists within them, and to understand their ability to manifest their external reality based on what is happening internally. And a quote that I will read to you comes from page 25. And it's not just one quote, it's a couple of quotes that I have underlined, but they all go together, and you'll see what I mean. The creation of anything in the physical universe is determined by what kind of attention you place on it. The inner experience of keeping your higher self focused on the object of your desire is the creation process for your life. Know that what you are observing and placing your attention upon inside will affect what goes on outside. You will co-create a world of bliss and spiritual consciousness if that is where you choose to place your attention. And I feel like that within itself is pretty self-explanatory. Your Sacred Self, Making the Decision to Be Free by Wayne Dyer. The third book that I'm going to recommend to you is Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life by Hector Garcia and Francesc Miralles. I'm probably butchering their names, but all that matters is that you know the name of the book. Again, read this book when I was 16 or 17 years old, and this book was almost the guiding light that led me towards the understanding that it is possible to do something that you love and make a living off of it. And that if people try to tell you otherwise, that they themselves have not connected to their passion and how they could potentially benefit from pursuing their own passion. So Hector Garcia has lived, or at the time of this being written and published, had lived in Japan for over a decade. And I believe he was working in technology, whereas Francesc Miralles is an author who specializes in self-help and I believe inspirational books. And so they came together to create Ikigai in terms of the book itself. So the rough translation of Ikigai is reason for being, and or essentially the reason that you get up in the morning. And the book itself focuses on a study of longevity, and if a person finding their Ikigai, aka their reason for being, can enable them to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. So I think it beautifully combines philosophy, science, and interviews from centenarians, who are people who have lived to be 100 and older. And I believe the combination of, like I said, of philosophy and science really enables this book to be practical as well. And it discusses things like diet. It talks about how stress can negatively impact our health, how anxiety can negatively impact our health, It talks about exercising, talks about spending time with loved ones and how that positively impacts not only our psyche, but our physical well-being. And I just found the entire conversation throughout this book to be really inspiring and really informational in how exactly stress and being unhappy can negatively impact our physical well-being. This book was what inspired me to start asking myself what would bring me the most peace in my everyday life. So not just even about career, but just actions that I could do every day that would make me feel at peace and content with where I am and, the present moment. And in the long run, what would bring me peace, contentment, and joy in terms of career and just the longevity of what I see myself doing in the future. So if you are feeling a little bit lost in life, or you're feeling like you don't really know what direction you want to go in next, this is a book that I do recommend to you in terms of starting to ask yourself the important questions of like what would make you the happiest or what would bring you the most peace, and the steps that you can start taking to follow that path. And I think this is also a good book for those who are also interested in meditation and mindfulness, as most of my recommendations have been about that or have involved that in some way. So yeah. And I'll read you a quote from page 40. It's a very tiny quote. It's a one-liner, but I felt like it really stood out to me as, the reason why people should find their personal reason for being. The quote is, "Existential frustration arises when our life is without purpose or when that purpose is skewed." And like I said, I think that is very self-explanatory. I think many of our collective society tend to be very unhappy, not necessarily because anything is happening externally, but because they themselves do not feel like they are where they want to be or where they should be, and they are not taking the steps they could be to get there. So, yeah. And the final book that I'm going to talk about is one that you have probably heard before, especially if you've watched other videos like this of people talking about books that are centered around spirituality or self-help, and that is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And this is a book I read actually when I was 15. So when I really first started my spiritual journey, this book found its way into my hands. And I will say that this book, I believe, was the catalyst for me understanding that I was not the main character of my show. I mean, I think most teenagers have main character syndrome. They genuinely do believe that they are the star of everything and they are the center of the world and that everyone else is pretty much like an extra in their story. But reading this book when I was 15 helped me to understand that that was not the case, and that everyone that I encountered, they had their own internal world. They had their own feelings, their own thoughts, their own history, their own experiences, and that all of those things combined made them who they are now and can be impacting the way that they treat me. And vice versa. It helped me to understand that my own past and my own feelings and my own thoughts could potentially be projected onto the people around me if I am not conscious of it. So to briefly talk about Don, I will just read the back of his cover so you can get a better understanding of who he is, because there's no way that I really think that I could summarize this without actually just reading the thing. So Don Miguel Ruiz was born into a family of healers and raised in rural Mexico by a curandera, which means healer, mother, and a nagual, which means shaman grandfather. The family anticipated that Miguel would embrace their centuries-old legacy of healing and teaching and carry forward the esoteric Toltec knowledge. Instead, distracted by modern life, Miguel chose to attend medical school and become a surgeon. A near-death experience changed his life. Late one night in the early 1970s, he awoke suddenly, having fallen asleep at the wheel of his car. At that instant, the car careened into a wall of concrete. Don Miguel remembers that he was not in his physical body as he watched himself pull his 2 friends to safety. Stunned by this experience, he began an intensive practice of self-inquiry. He devoted himself to the mastery of the ancient ancestral wisdom, studying earnestly with his mother and completing an apprenticeship with a powerful shaman in the Mexican desert. His grandfather, who had since passed on, continued to teach him in his dreams. In the tradition of the Toltec, a nagual guides an individual to personal freedom. Don Miguel Ruiz, a nagual from the Eagle Knight lineage, has dedicated his life to sharing the wisdom of the ancient Toltec. So like I said, I don't think there was any way I could have summed that up better than how the book itself summarized it. So that's a little bit about him. And as I said, this book just helped me to bring that awareness of other people into my daily life and understand that sometimes that the way that we are treated by people is not personal to us. For the most part, it's not personal to us. Most of the way that we are treated or how we are treated comes from that person's own internal history, their own experiences and their own opinions, and they are not direct reflections of us, and vice versa. That the way we treat people, for the most part, a lot of the times, if we're not conscious of it, is not because of anything that person did, but because of things that have happened in the past that maybe we haven't healed, we haven't dealt with, and we are projecting onto that person. So if you are looking to bring that level of mindfulness into your life, of the awareness of other people's internal worlds, but also become aware of maybe some unhealed things within yourself that need your attention, I do recommend this book to you so you can come, to that understanding. And yeah, the 4 Agreements. Like I said, you've probably heard of this book, and if this is, like your 50th time hearing about it and you still haven't read it, just see this as like a triple confirmation that, this book does need to end up in your hands. So yeah, that is going to be it for this video. I hope that you got at least 1 or 2 recommendations from this video that you will be able to carry forward, meaning that maybe you purchase them after you watch this video. Yeah, so I thank you so much for spending time with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.